Good morning. Thank you for coming to this session. So my colleague, as you see, there are two people here. My colleague, Maureen, is here, sit at the front. He has provided a lot of input to this talk. Since he has another talk at the LASCON, we have decided for me to give this talk. But he has agreed to answer all the questions. Okay, we're going to talk. Okay, it's better. That's not so good. Okay, I'll just not look at the screen.
In the meanwhile, can you go?
We're going to talk about security while scaling Agile. That's our topic. So one day, I met with a product owner. I mentioned to him, I have not seen new security activities recently. What's happening? And he said, we have a new process. He's kind of excited, he said, we have a new process. I said, what's that? He said, SAFE. And then I say, SAFE? S-A-F-E, I slowly spelled out. He said, sure, yeah, safe. Safe? Shouldn't you do more security to be safe? So what's going on here? What's the problem? He wants to be safe and he didn't have time to do security activities. It turned out he's talking about this, SAFE, the Scaled Agile Framework. And but I was thinking about this, to be secure, to be safe. So not only I don't see new security activities which they have planned to do, but also we're not even talking about the same language. So as security professionals, what do we do in such situations? My name is Karen, and I have worked in the security and the privacy for a long time. Currently, I'm a principal security architect. It's weird, I always want to turn here. But the voice will change. So I'm a principal security architect with Palace. More specifically, I'm working with our cloud protection business line. As we know, there's some trend in the past 2 decades. The important thing is the technology. We all know, right? The technology innovations has changed our lives, everyone's lives, a great deal. So this has created high demands for quick deliveries, for continuous deliveries of products. With that trend, on the one hand, to meet these demands, the software security, the software development process had went through a lot of many transformations. You may have different transformations. You may be using different frameworks than we do. But we have went through from Agile development model, from waterfall to Agile, and now we're moving to scaled Agile. Maybe you are doing something similar, not necessarily the same framework. On the other hand, as we know, the cyberspace is quickly expanding, and at the same time, we see a great increase of malicious activities, especially since last year because of lockdowns, everybody work from home. And at the same time, the software composition become more and more complex. All these made the software security more and more important, right? So we have two aspects. The software development process is changing and the security become more important. Then as security practitioners like us, like all the people in this room, we really don't have any choice but join the journey of what is changing, right? Join the journey of the software engineers that has been going through. So the question is, how do we do that? How can we go along the journey and be the guardrail without being roadblockers? I've been told I'm the roadblocker. You block releases. How do we do without being the roadblockers? So in this talk, we will share our experience and the lessons learned in adopting our security process to the evolving software development activities. So we will talk about at each stage our challenges facing the change of the software process, and how do we adapt, what changes are we made to adapt to the software process. And another thing is the journey continues. We're not at the end of the road, right? And what additional work we still have to do. As we mentioned earlier, you may be going through different transformations. You may be using different framework than we're currently use called SAFe, a nice name. However, what we learned from our experience not only will help us toward future changes, hopefully this will be helpful for you as well. So let's start the journey. So the division, the business lines I'm working with at Palace, we provide security products and services to our customers. So the software security is critical to our business. So we do take it seriously, and I understand from Dan talk this morning, not all the companies treat it seriously, but we're a security company. And to manage security activities, we do have a software security assurance plan. So we do have software products and also hardware products. So we have firmware, and we don't typically say application security, software security. So we have an assurance plan which include a set of security activities and also mandatory security requirements. Then we have tools, we have trainings, and so on and so forth. And so, and then to support that, we have a software security community. The security champions within the community, they are not full-time security people, and they are like people like Maureen. They are security champions. They are within the product team. Like, for example, Maureen, he's a software engineer. He's also an architect, and he's Scrum Master, he's technical lead, and importantly, he's a security champion. So all our security champions are within the team. So in the past, most of our product lines use waterfall models. Probably it's true for some of you. That's in the old days. So the product development lifecycle looks like this, right? And you have we start with bid, right? And you answer RFPs, and you launch. Normally, product launch is a big deal. And then you do study, you develop, and then you acceptance. You end up with operation, or if the customer operates themselves, then you have a warranty period, right? So it's most products go through this process. And so at each stage, there's a formal process to decide if or not we can go to the next stage. A lot of things are very formal, the documentation and the review. And I remember in my younger days, you have formal technical review at each stage. And our security plans were defined accordingly. And at each stage of the product life cycle, we have various security activities you have to perform. And then before you go to the next stage, all these activities have to be verified. We have total about 50 security activities in total. So the plan actually worked in the past. And then, as we mentioned from the beginning, right, due to the business need of and the industry trend for continuous delivery, so the product lines have started to transition into Agile process. Look like that, right? And as you know, the Agile is an iterative approach. It helps to deliver values to customers faster and reduce the risks for each deliveries. So the Agile teams, they will work on small but consumable increments instead of making big releases every 6 months, a year or 2 years or even more, right? So it is an iterative process. As you can imagine, our previous plan, which follows the waterfall model, does not fit in this small, quick cycles very well, right? And the challenge for us is how do we map our rich set of security activities to this Agile process? That's the first transition we had. So we had various challenges. In the past, a product team is typically organized by components of the product. When I say product that include services. We also have cloud services or a solution, right? And so a team is larger, and each team could be responsible for several related components. For example, you could have a team which work on the server side components, and then another team which focus on the client side. And then with this Agile, in order to fast move around, the team has reorganized into smaller Scrum teams. So each teams at each period in time, in Agile I haven't mentioned that each loop they call a sprint. Right? Each Scrum team will focus on a particular small feature to deliver as quickly as possible. In order to do that, the team may touch more than one component. So it's a complete reorganization. You can think of as before, it's more functional. My server, my component, my database is more functional. Now we have cross-functionals. But it's a small team just focusing on one feature and which may touch different components. With this change, we also have a larger number of teams than it was before. You can imagine before we had 2 teams, now we may have 5, which in parallel deliver different features. And at the same time, we saw with those quick cycles that sprint, and it typically lasts 1 to 4 weeks. So it's very short cycle instead of 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years. In the old days, we plan really on yearly basis. Right now, we have to plan for these very short cycles. And then engineer manager just told me, Karen, we cannot do all these security activities. You have 50 of them. How do you expect every Scrum team to do all this in every small circle, in every sprint? What do we do, right? And so we did several things. First, we broke the fixed boundaries in the waterfall model, And we reoriented the security plan for continuous assurance. We want to make security as part of the engineering process. So that's what we wanted to do. Practically, during the transition, and they focus on deliver features. We have to realize that not all the features are related to, are relevant to security. For example, at the time, we're also making transition of the user interface in the old day, and then we have UX design team. Some of the delivery, some of the sprint, they are working on purely changing the user interface from the traditional interface with the buttons to the more modern interface without changing any of the flow. So for this work, we really don't need to do the security activities, right? So we realize not every sprint and every Scrum team need to go through all these activities. So the first thing we actually did was to reorganize how we express the security activities we need to do. And we basically, to fit the Agile style, we grouped the activities, as I mentioned, the 45, 50 of them, into about a dozen Agile stories. We follow basically the same style as the team used to express the task that need to be done. Group them into stories. So remember I mentioned the engineering manager told me he's the head of a product line, and he said, we can't do this, right? And what happened is we actually brainstormed together and to try to figure out how to make the security plan works for continuous delivery. And I was thinking last night, this is actually an important part. The security team, you don't have to work by yourself. You really want to involve with the engineering team together. So we actually brainstormed a few times, and we come out a decision tree. You don't see it on the slide, I just thought last night. We came out a decision tree. So it's basically saying, the decision tree asks a sequence of questions, just like the old engineering design, right? And in this task relevant to security or not, right? And then you decide. And it said, okay, this pure UI work, I want to change the color and the location of the button, right? That's not relevant. So you don't need to do the security stories. Now we're creating stories, right? And then you go to the next question. Does this work change the architecture of the product or not, right? And then you look at this work. It's fixing a bug. It does not change the architecture. So you do not need to do the security analysis of the architecture, okay? So it's a sequence of questions. And we had a team to try it out. And eventually, with the help of this engineering manager, he said, well, there has to be an easy way, a better way for my team to use, right, than looking at this flow chart. So we developed a tool which still asks questions, and the Scrum team, especially the security champion or product owner, depend on the team. So the team operate differently. They will just go through the tool and answer the questions, and then by the end, it will generate a security stories that needed for this particular sprint, for the task they need to do. So basically the tool helped the team to define their objectives and then to create relevant tickets. It's not all of them. You don't have to do all of them. You only need to do the ones you need. And then we have a dashboard for monitoring. Yeah, so another thing we figured out is so I'm not going to talk into details, but it's basically like that, right? And you group all the detailed activities into stories, and then during their sprint planning, and then they can use the tool to find out what stories they need, what security stories you need to do, and then you plan for it. And these activities are not equal. Some of the activities, for example, security architecture, risk assessment, and monetary security-based security requirements. For these activities, you want to do them as early as possible because you need to go through them to identify the issues and then identify the work to be done. And if you do that too late, and you may have to rework, it may generate new security issues. So we want to do this, especially we focus on risk assessment. That has to do as early as possible. And we really, Dan mentioned this morning, one of the mistakes he's saying is you have to do the security, and he's not considering the other aspect of product. For us, luckily, we have been doing that, right? Because we are embedded in the product lines. When there is a vulnerability, for example, to be fixed, right? Very often you may have more than one. And what do you do? How do you prioritize them? You do risk assessment. There's a vulnerability. What is the risk? What's the impact to our product? Right? So those has to be done early. Yeah, I've given talk in the past about risk importance of risk assessment. So now we have tried to align our security plan to the engineering process, which they moved to Agile. And with these changes, it seems to be working, right? And so we had that for a while. And then the engineering, they work in the Agile process. They found some other issues with the process. It's mainly related to the scalability of Agile. So as I mentioned, before we had 2-3 teams, and with Agile we have a little more teams, more Scrum teams. Now, because of the various reasons and the product become bigger and more complex, we have more customers, we have more work to do, we have more people. And now, for one product line, we can have 12, 20 Scrum teams. Then it becomes impossible to coordinate about a dozen or 2 dozen teams together. There's dependencies. Remember, they're all focusing, delivering new features. They may be small, they deliver very quickly, but a feature can touch multiple components. And then you'll have 1 dozen or 2 dozen teams working in parallel. They are touching the same components. Who will do what first? It's become impossible to resolve the dependencies. Another problem is so there are shared resources that all these teams are using. For example, the platform, the security, documentation, and the marketing. And it's very hard to get commitments from these shared resources because all these teams are competing for shared resources. And then it's also difficult for management to have a visibility of future resources, future releases, right? As before, it's fixed. Now you have all these teams trying to make release. What's coming, when it's coming, it's more difficult. So that's why SAFE come to rescue in a sense. And so our business line has decided to adopt this process, as you heard earlier. It's called SAFE. It's a Scaled Agile framework. So this framework is The goal of this framework is to help Agile to scale, and which can be at the enterprise level. What you see is they call it essential. So that's the basic setup. And they have another they call enterprise Agile safe. That basically you have another layer. You can have coordination between different product lines. But let's talk about just safe. And so within the product line, you have a number of Scrum teams. You can have a dozen or 2 dozen. And then someone has to coordinate this work. They call it release train engineer. And there are other roles I'm not going to mention. But the safe, they have the concept. It's called Agile. You will see Agile release tree on the top of the slides. So it emphasizes continuous exploration, continuous integration, and a continuous deployment. So Agile release train, also called ART. Okay. So the progress of this train, this ART, is defined by something they call the program increment. That's what you see the bigger yellow bars. That's called a program increment. So the program inside each program increment, you can have iterations, or you call it sprint, right? And you can deliver as many, as often as you want, but everything, every feature has to be split until it fits into API, program increment. That's what we call PI. And at the beginning of the PI, there's PI planning activity. They call it PI planning. That's when everyone involved in this ART will get together to do the planning. And so the ART can have 100 or 200 people. They will it's all the stakeholders, from developers to business owners, and everyone in between, and product management, system engineer, and the business owner, and the marketing, and the product owner, and everyone get together. So with these PI plannings, objectives are committed, are defined for this PI. Objectives are defined and committed. You have to commit to these objectives. And the details plans are made. They made details plans, and they resolve all the dependencies of all the different teams. Who will do this first, so you don't bump into each other. So everything is, all the scalability issues that we mentioned earlier are resolved during this PI planning. So everything is time boxed, it's fixed. How long the PI is, it's typically 8 to 12 weeks, and then within it you have sprint, 3 weeks, let's say. Everything is fixed. Now, all the product teams start to move to here. Now, as you can imagine, such structure will present new challenges to our security process, right? That's why we had a conversation you heard at the beginning, right? We have a new process. That's why we're not doing new security activities. So there are several challenges. We just list a few of them. As I mentioned, everything is time boxed. And people tell me it's not possible to finish your security plan for every PI. Or some other people saying, how can you tell us to do all these security things within the PI? Right? And that's one problem. That's the time box. The other problem is with the scaled Agile, it's a value-driven process. So the goal is value. That's the biggest thing for Agile is value. You want to deliver values as quickly as possible. So I have security champions, as I mentioned, they're all in different product lines, different product teams, right? The security champions, they told me, we cannot justify the business value for security activities. What does he mean? You know, when they do the PI planning, you have different activities. the way they prioritize is by business value. And they said we cannot justify. And then the security stories are prioritized lower than other activities, right? Than other stories. And sometimes will push from PI to PI. That's why the product owner is saying, every time before PI planning, and I said, well, remember, we said we need to do these security stories. And he said, I'm sure I will do it, right? And after the PI planning, I said, which iteration you're going to do? And he said, unfortunately, it pushed to the next PI, okay? So it's prioritized lower. Another thing is, it's more of the engineering issue. In the past, with Agile, the teams, they use a concept, they use a feature branch. Branch meaning the software branch, right? And then they will do their security stories on the feature and before they merge into the main branch. But the SAFe recommended to use what they call trunk-based development. So you have a main trunk. Basically, as soon as your code is ready, you push to the main trunk. They have a reason for it, right? So in this way, you can do the system level testing, integrating testing as frequently as possible, as quickly as possible, in order to identify problems, right? If you integrate, you merge later, when you identify the problem, it may cause rework and redesign will cause design and cause delays. That's why you want to push to the main trunk as early as possible. So that also means for the security security activities, we need to perform on the main trunk. That means we need to automate it in our pipeline, which we're not there yet. Now, what we do, or what we have been doing to address these challenges, we have done a couple of things since the teams moved to SAFe. First, we evolve our security plan again. Remember, the first change is we reorganized into security stories. And so we actually updated the stories, they using the SAFe language. And we also provide better clarifications and what needs to be done, how you do it, and what are the tools available. And with the SAFe language, with SAFe, we actually tried a couple of things. Initially, during SAFe training, the trainers, in the SAFe training, they don't mention about security, right? You can imagine. So we asked, what do we do about security? The recommendation was treat them as non-functional requirement. We actually tried. And also it works in theory, right? For every push, and you will finish all these activities. But it didn't work in practice because it's the business owner who prioritizes all the stories, all the tasks. And then they prioritize non-functional requirements lower than functional requirements. You can imagine, right? And the functional requirements, they see value, right? Non-functional requirements, they don't see that clearly. So it didn't work out well. And however, from long run, and if we have more tools automated, the non-functional requirement could be a good place because you can say if the acceptance criteria, you have to finish all these non-functional requirements. But at least at the beginning we tried, it didn't work. And if you think about SAFe is about the value, in order to go along with the value-driven process, we started to look through our security plan, right? We have all these stories. We look at this security plan, and then we identify things, we can call them enablers. So enablers in SAFe are activities for evolving architecture, improve infrastructure, and for compliance. So we use, and it turned out that most of our security stories can be treated as enablers. For example, instead of treating, do a static security testing as a story, and we make automate SAST as an enabler. Because enabler provide value for the infrastructure, for the present and the future business features, they can be prioritized much better. So this addressed the value proposition problem. And as I mentioned earlier, because of the main trunk, because of all these quick push, we need to focus on the automation. So that's more of the security scans. We want to put the security scans and the testing into the pipeline. And at the meantime, we want to provide better security guidelines for using these tools. We're also building security templates for pipelines. This is a work in progress because we have many different product lines. Each product, they use different languages. Even within a product, they use different languages. And they use different frameworks. And they have different pipeline technologies. Some use GitLab, some use GitHub, some use TeamCity, and some use Jenkins. There's many different ones. So it's still work in progress in terms of automation into different pipelines. So the question is, can we automate everything? Right? That's ideally, that's what we want to do. Practically, not everything is automatable. And I remember Dan Cannell was giving a talk, it's an online talk last year, and a talk about things are not automatable. Yeah. So that aligned with him. There's certain things that are not automatable, at least with current technology. You can say, oh, we'll have AI that will automate these, but it will take time. And believe me, I worked on it for many, many years. So for example, the security assessment. When I talk about security assessment, it involves identify your business assets, your supporting assets. You do threat modeling, and you assess your risk, and you make management decisions. Just think about this. This, at least for now, is not automatable. With the future technology, you may be able to automate some parts of it. And then we have a set of mandatory security requirements. You want to check your compliance. That is not automatable. And maybe some part of it, you can code it. That's what I want to do, but we're not there yet. Another thing is we really push to identify security issues as early as possible. I tell you a story. Once the appeal asked, telling me, we have a new user flow to make it more user-friendly, more convenient for users. Can you look at it if it causes any security issues? So we look at it and did a very quick analysis. And we realized it brings a medium risk. It's not high risk, but it brings medium risk. But if you think about it, it's just trying to solve some use cases, not major use cases. Then it's not worth it to bring a medium use case. And he accepted and decided not to do it. But imagine if you do such risk assessment at the end, you already spend your resources to do the work, and then you realize it's not worth it, right? So you want to do identify security issues as early as possible. Then, particularly with SAFE, how do you do it? And Maureen suggested a couple of opportunities. You can use a research spike. That's what you typically do at the beginning, right? So that's a perfect place you can do your exploration, you do your analysis for security risk. And if you identify new issues, if you can plan into the current PI or the work period or whatever you call, and you can do it. Otherwise, you talk with PO, you make changes, and you may change the scope, or you decide you push to the next PI. And also the SAFE as a concept of continuous exploration. That's also an opportunity to do security analysis. So it's important to build security into your process. Again, you may be using a different process. The one we use, they call it PI planning, right? In SAFE, you have PI planning. Those are the vertical bars you saw earlier. So we want to create security stories using the tool we have before and during the PI planning, right? And then talk about security at the PI planning. And then you plan your capacity for security work during the PI planning. And then for planning the capacity, and our product teams are very creative. They know how to do it. They may plan the capacity for security work directly, and they may reserve some capacity for dealing with unknowns. That's a good place also to do the security work. And then and also when we talk about the release train level, they typically also reserve some capacity for pure engineering work that is not controlled product owner. That's also an opportunity. So with these changes, the security is well embedded into the engineering process. So the journey continues. We still have work to do, and because the engineering process has changed, and it will change again, right? It will not stop there. So we cannot stop evolving our security process. We have to go along the way. And for example, the maturity of our security champions, as you, so we do have trainings, right? And another thing is, as you all know, there's a lot of, they call it great resign, right? Since COVID, a lot of companies, have people changing places. People resign here and go to other places. And we are not isolated, especially our security champions. They are really, really good, and it's very easy to be grabbed by other companies. Then we have new security champions. We have continued learning. So that's not, that's a continuing process. And we also want to continuously improve our process in terms, especially in terms of automation guidelines and the tools. There's so many security tools, and we have to evaluate them and figure out, test them, and figure out how to integrate in the pipelines. Okay, so So what are our takeaways? I think to think back, I think it's very important to work closely with the engineering team. And in many of the things, it's in my experience, it's really resolved by working with engineer directly. And also with not just the people like Maureen, right? And he can do everything. And you also want to work with engineering managers, product owners, which is very important because product owner will prioritize the tasks. And we want to embed the security in the engineering process. That's what we said earlier. And automate the security tasks as much as possible. And as security people, just be friends with engineers and product owners, and be persistent, be patient, and be helpful. Thank you. Sorry, talk longer than I'm supposed to. Okay. Questions? And Maureen can answer. Okay.
Earlier in the presentation, you were talking about generating a set of stories.
Yes.
For the different teams. Do you have a concrete example, or were those cards on the previous page the examples like to generate a SaaS story or a security, or was it something a little bit more connected to what they were building, like
I can talk about it.
A project might have to fulfill?
I can talk about it. If I want to show you, I have to connect to VPN and things like that. I can't do it. Everything is online, but I can talk about it, right? So initially, when we first changed to Agile, right, and the story would be, let's see, a risk, the security scan. You will say it's a purely agile way. You will say, as a product owner, I want to see my product go. I want to see the product go through the static security assessment tools. I want to see the report. And then, definition of done is the result. There is a result and the high and the critical risk that has been addressed. Yeah, so it's that style. And then with safe, with skilled agile, we change the style again. For example, the same task, right? You need to do the security scan. We change it as an enabler. When you have an enabler, you don't need to say, as a stakeholder, I have to do something. And then we change the story into enabler story. It will say, build SaaS tools into the pipeline, and then you scan it every time you push, and then these are the tools you can use, and here are the guidelines. Yeah.
Yes, so basically as Ken said, right? So the stories were called subtasks, so it depends the scale, at which scale you do those changes. For us, like since we are doing continuous feature deliveries, so first there are mostly subtasks for a single story. And depending on the feature, what kind of changes you're doing, the tool would create the task for you. You need to do SaaS, you need to do Dast, or whatever, those kind of things. And basically, so it depends on what kind of changes you're doing, like Ken explained earlier. And so the tool is basically helping along in that case.
So essentially, it built out like the security epic and then the sub-stories that were applicable to that team, whatever work that team was assembling.
Yes, so again, Epic generally in Jira terms, it's a bigger thing, right?
Oh yeah.
So, but in terms of for features, small features, we are talking about stories with subtasks, something which can fit into within a single sprint. But if we are doing it for something like a new component, for which you need to do all the setup for set up the pipelines for Dash and everything, in that case, yes, we can do separate stories. But generally speaking, for a particular feature, we end up creating a single story with all the subtasks for perform the SaaS for this, and generally with all of those things now automated, you don't need to do much over there to perform for a single feature. You are just running the jobs, making sure to run, verify the analysis, and do the fixes over there based on that. So based on this, since we are doing, and that's the difference between the waterfall versus Agile, and even within Agile, continuous delivery where we are delivering every small features over there. So the scale of the security activities you need to perform, they also reduce a lot, right? So at the end you're doing small tasks rather than the bigger stories which are being epic.
I get that. I think one of the things I found real fascinating, and maybe this is somewhere you're going in the future, a problem that I'm faced with right now is I have 650 different engineers globally spread across. And what you're describing, I would put under my security epic for whatever pipeline they're doing. They have to enable these hygiene activities inside their product that they own. But what I started to hear a sense of in your talk that I thought was very intriguing was, one, you had a tool that was generating this, and that two, the description about non-functionals, because that's the exact same approach I'm doing, is I'm creating standard non-functionals for program owners and teams to consider from a large menu, essentially just like the OWASP validation suite, and say which ones are applicable to you each time and pop them up. The fact that you have a tool that helps screen and identify, I think that's a very powerful concept. But this ties to like a very specific thing, like authentication. here's your abuse test and misuse tests that should come along with your authentication requirements.
Yeah, and I think over there, the decision tree that Ken was mentioning, that is helping a lot because for you're talking about like 15 to 20 Scrum teams, and it's difficult for Karen to monitor all of them saying, okay, make sure you're doing all those tasks or not, right? So for with those decision tree kind of people saying, okay, what kind of changes you're doing, and based on that tool tells, okay, yeah, this activity is applicable for you, make sure you do that kind of thing. So that is helping a lot over there, and especially like the size you're talking about. I can imagine how difficult it would be over there to apply that, right? So we are talking about the art of like 200 people, and we before we moved to SAFE, it was being very difficult to manage. With SAFE, there are a few things we call improve, like the visibility, not within just engineering, but also at the management as well as across the shared resources. I think that solved the issue a lot for us. And with the security part over there getting integrated with that, yeah, it's working well as of now. Again, still long way to go, but signs are early.
So all your work visibility is all tied through Jira or wherever you're using for work tracking.
Exactly.
On those neighborhoods.
That's
That's
why,
your main visibility.
that's why we can have a dynamic dashboard. It grab the stories and see the status, you can do that. And I cannot, let me finish this. I cannot emphasize more of working with the engineering team directly, and I'm sure you all have security team. So when I started a couple of years ago, we have over our product line, our business line, we have over 600 engineers. And I'm the only person, full-time security architect. And then we have another person, just two of us. Just imagine, how do you cover this, right? That's why we have security champions, people like Maureen, who helped a great deal. Otherwise, two people and over 600 people, engineers. And now we are lucky we have a few more people, but it's still just barely 1% of full-time security. We fully rely on our security champion program.